Hey guys, welcome to another session of RBTL, or Reading Between the Lines. This is my balance adjustment preview thoughts for the September 2nd edition. We'll just call it the Ravi Luna batch or whatever. So Apocalypse Ravi being our 5-star ML this time. I mean, she has been sitting out for quite a while, especially if you're talking about World Arena seasons. And, you know, the main reason is that, you know, Spec Tenny was prevalent, and Guiding Light, especially after Guiding Light buff, she just became like almost utterly useless compared to Fire Ravi, which has the ability to swing into AoE, has the ability to debuff your targets, has the CR boost innate, has, you know, CR pushback. Fire Ravi is just a bit better in terms of how Frenzy works as well, since Fire Ravi would be able to get, usually you wouldn't build Fire Ravi with just HP, she would have like a mix of HP and defense, and then attack is important. So with her Demon Blood, her passive, scaling with Frenzy, Fire Ravi just became better just because she did more damage. Apocalypse Ravi, I mean, unless you chase the high attack, which usually isn't a common build, you're gonna be basically losing out on the Frenzy and then not having Demon Blood, a passive of the like. So Apocalypse Ravi ended up being too slow, not be able to reach people in Guiding Light or Stealth or those kind of mechanics, and then she's just kind of sit out. So, you know, like with her changes, I think she's more usable on paper, but like whether or not she'll be more usable in World Arena, she'll still have the same issues. Realistically, she'll still have the same issues, but some issues are lowered. So anyways, let's get into it. Spectral Axe after, so inflicts injury before absorbing some of the damage's health. Damage dealt increases proportion to caster's max health. So really the same skill as it was before, except now injury is applied. Now, one may argue that, well, injury kind of sucks. It's in 10%. It's the lowest injury skill compared to Illinab and Mort, which is the only other two heroes that have injury at the moment. Yes, it's lower, but I mean, it's on the S1. A lot of people still think Apocalypse Ravi on counter set is the way to go. And with her new change for her passive War God's Might, that might be the case still. But regardless, let's just say, assume that she is on counter set, then yeah, every time she counters, she'll be able to, you know, chip a bit of that max HP down. Now, for those who are still unfamiliar with injury, because it's still not a very popular mechanic, injury decreases up to whatever the skill says. In terms of the max health is 10%, that's the max amount of max health that she can take out, but you'd have to hit a certain amount of damage threshold to do it. So if you don't do enough damage on the S1, let's say you don't have an attack buff, you don't have, you know, a soul burn, you might be doing like, you know, 2% max health, 3%, 4%, all the way up to 10. It's gonna be better than nothing, in my opinion. The soul burn damage was also increased. So soul burn before was a 20 soul burn, same as Fire Ravi. Increase the damage of the S1, unable to draw a dual attack. It'll be the same, but the soul burn damage will increase. So before, it would already do pretty good damage if you soul burned. As much damage as the S3, although S1 and S3 on Apocalypse Ravi is scaled different. One is more emphasis on the attack, the other is more emphasized on the health, but regardless, it's okay. But again, Apocalypse Ravi is going to be still basically doing the same thing and suffering in Frenzy mode. So she's not going to be a really good Frenzy hero to bring. Again, HP is lowered really quick on Frenzy. That means her healing, her self-healing will also be lowered as well. So there's that. Of course, with her doing injuries, that might help with the Frenzy. But we'll have to see in practice. We'll have to see. I think she still suffers with the same kind of weaknesses she did, but at least now she won't be super slow. So War God's Might, the changes now is that you have an increased combat readiness by 15% each time. Every time she's attacked, she consumes 10 fighting spirit. Starts the battle at 50 fighting spirit, and the critical hit chance is at 30%. So everything else is the same except the combat readiness. So if you have her on counter set, S1 gives you 20 fighting spirit. So if you counter, and with the amount of CR boost that you can gain from it, I don't think she's going to be suffering too much in terms of lacking fighting spirit. But in terms of you're banking on that to be the case for 20% RNG, sorry, 20% RNG on a counter set, then you know that might still be pretty big. So ideally, if you have her on counter set, she still wouldn't be like base speed slow. But I mean, for those of us who are really familiar with combat readiness, you know, you could be base speed. Now I have to say though, I'll probably plug in just a comment of like just recent droves of heroes and buffs. There's a lot of combat readiness increase. And what that does is honestly, it lowers the value of speed set. Lowers it. I'm not saying it makes it, you know, not usable. I'm not saying that at all. We're talking about if you're going to compare it on a scale of like 1 to 10, comparing counter set, or let's say any set that's not speed set, comparing those sets to speed set, the combat readiness would diminish the, let's say speed set was 10 out of 10, would make it probably like a 9 out of 10. So it's not super significant, but it is definitely there. The more heroes that have combat readiness manipulation, either CR pushback or, you know, combat readiness forward, sorry, we commonly call it CR push, it's going to diminish the need. Not saying that, again, it's not saying that speed set is irrelevant, but it's going to diminish the effectiveness of a speed set over something like a counter set. Now I did mention this already a couple months ago. I did my own account showcase for the World Arena season of Skyward, and in there I was already talking about, like, I mean, like you just basically need to understand that once you hit the 90, once you had the 90 gear, counter set and lifesteal set became much more valuable, because you would be able to make up the speed loss from a speed set, but then gaining extra set effects, so the counter or the lifesteal, etc, etc. We have seen like many people be able to run, you know, triple double sets, so like, you know, triple effect resistance set, or, you know, double HP set with immunity, and still be able to match similar stats as speed set, but then benefiting from whatever scales better on that specific hero. So it's not, you know, it's not news, but in case you're new and you're listening to this, that's what we have to talk about. So anyways, that's the side plug. It's not saying that it's bad, but combat readiness is definitely like the hard sell that Epic 7 is really, I mean, that and ignore effect resistance, I mean, those things are like, you know, it's like, those are really hot sells for heroes at the moment. Anything with ignore effect resistance and combat readiness manipulation, those two things are really big right now. It helps players who are not lucky getting really fast speed gear be able to sit back and just benefit from cutting the line, so to speak. So Apocalypse Ravi will have the same treatment here, and honestly I think it's okay, because you're comparing two Ravis, you're comparing the Fire Ravi to this one. Fire Ravi already has something like this, but hers is limited to the amount of fighting spirit she gets. But like I said, I don't think she's gonna really have a big problem sustaining that unless people are going at her like non-stop, and you know, being able to CR boost themselves. So like stuff like, you know, like C-Dom with ML Charles and stuff like that, so that she doesn't get the turn, then she might have a problem getting the combat readiness for a long time. But otherwise, in a standard like, I think, World Arena match, I don't think she's gonna have an issue keeping the fighting spirit up so that she has the CR boost the entire time. So it's a CR boost with a condition, but the condition is not super hard to sustain. That's how I would put it. Let's see. And then the S3 Deliverance Soul Exchange, we're gonna read the Awakened version. Now instead of a 10% health on the revive, you got a 30%, so that's a pretty big deal. You're gonna usually be pairing a Ravi with people who have high HP pools, most likely anyway. You're not gonna be running it with like a, you know, but well, depends on the scenario, but most likely than not, you're gonna be running a more sustainy comp, like a Soul Weaver is in there, a tank is in there, stuff like that. So 30% health is really good. That will help sustain for a turn or two, and the skill null, of course, is still applied. And the damage dealt by this skill is increased every time somebody dies, so it's acting a bit like a Spectenny passive. But instead of increasing attack, it increases the damage dealt. So we'll have to kind of see how the modifiers are adjusted here. That just keep note that there is up to 3 times. So the effect can stack up to 3 times. So she can revive ideally, so that would be bonus for you, and then hopefully you kill off 2 targets on your opponents. If you kill off 3 targets on your opponents, there's only 1 left, so you pretty much already won. But ideally that's how she's kind of working. So I think, you know, I think she has potential, and her S3 gives her 30 fighting spirit back. So 10 fighting spirit per time she's hit with a heal with a CR boost, 20 fighting spirit for the S1, 30 fighting spirit for the S3. I don't think it's a huge deal. So in terms of like the fighting spirit for the CR boost, she'd pretty much have it indefinitely. This again, we have to see how much damage it does, but she already did pretty decent damage on the S3, decent damage on the S1. But now that the soul burn on the S1 is increased and this is stackable, we're gonna probably be looking at, again, hand in hand S1 and S3 damage. But this one does take a specific requirement. So the S3 might have a higher damage overall, plus it's on a cooldown. So I'm expecting that. Again, like I said, the issues with Ravi would be similar to how she was before. So we'll have to see whether or not this is enough to make her really relevant again. If you're talking about her as a Golden Boys counter, I think she'll be better for it. But in terms of everything else that she suffered with, she probably wouldn't be as good. Luna, again, suffers the same thing, but let's not use that scenario in terms of like people can go into stealth and makes them irrelevant. Let's not use that scenario as like how I'm gonna be critiquing these. It is important to note. I do feel that because I see the trend of single target damage dealers always suffering with that. Just if they have reach or not. So I mean, that's always something that we have to consider. Luna's buff, I have to say, I'm more excited about Luna's buff than Ravi's buff. I think Luna's buff is kind of like I mean, we've all been wanting Luna buff for a long time. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I know specific people who said that we never wanted Luna buff. But for me specifically, because you know, really early on, I tripled Esther. And then for those of you who know me, you know the story like over and over. It's like one of those old wives' tales at this point. And then Draco Play came on, and then I thought Draco Play was really good, so I wanted to max limit break it, and I ended up getting another 5 Luna. So if ML Luna will ever become a thing, we don't know. I will have those 5 extra Luna waiting as well. So I mean, to me, Luna was a big deal. But again, she suffers the same thing as Apocalypse Ravi, so I don't know if World Arena will be the best case scenario. But she definitely shows a lot of promise in her kit. She already had, and so I think that we all had like all these ideas floating around. I've talked to many people on my stream before, like how should we buff Luna and stuff. To be honest, I'm very satisfied with the buff that they gave her, knowing that okay, she doesn't swing into AoE, which is okay. But it is definitely a buff, a straight up buff of what she had before. I think this is really good. So first things first is the S1 now. If you soul burn instead of on the S3, use the increased damage up to a 2.2 times modifier, I believe. At the moment, she'll be standing at a 1.5 on the S3 and up to a 2.1 on the S1. So that hasn't changed in terms of the damage modifier, but increase the soul burn, you have basically an S3, her old S3 into the S1 on command. So on demand, you're gonna have it. Increase the number of attacks, number attack to max. So she'll do her 3 turn one, or the we'll call it the 10 hit one, or the whatever you want to call it. Basically the multiple strike one. The maximum number hit, you'll be able to do that on the S1 as long as you soul burn it. So in terms of the interplay of the S1 and the S3, it's a lot better now. Decreasing the cooldown by up to 3 if you're hitting the max number, and the soul burn will guarantee that. So Ragnar Spear will be able to be reduced much quicker in terms of less RNG required to do it. So that was one of the things that we talked about. It's like, oh, you know, make the less RNG. They did it, they covered it. So S1, you know, check mark, done. Dragon Knight's Will after increases the critical hit chance and the critical hit resistance by 30%. Now this is where it makes her almost otherworldly, in my opinion. people who already used Luna for PvP before she was buffed would probably run her on a counter set with Sigurd's Scythe or something like that. And she already has the S1EE, which gives her 15% CR boost. So again, you know, what was I talking about on the A Ravi portion? CR boost, meaning that the heroes could be much slower and still benefit from it. That could still be the go-to PvP Luna build, in my opinion, if you have the S1EE, of course. If you have her designed to be a single target nuker, which she'll still be very strong to do that, you may want to look into the S3EE, which grants her an extra turn if the opponent is dead. That S3EE won't really be that usable in a PvE scenario, because if you are gonna one-shot something, it's most likely a boss, and so, you know, the extra turn won't matter. So that EE was always designed to be PvP, but of course her kit kind of suffered, so no one really used that, and she ended up being PvE hero with the S1EE. But I think the S1EE still might be her go-to here, especially now with more survivability up front. So the 30% critical hit reduction will really help that, in my opinion. I mean, 30% is like, well, Senya 50%, she always gets crit anyway. You know, I've been there. I've done that to opponents' Senyas as well. So I know the rate is lower, but it still helps her survivability. That's all I'm saying. Luna is, if you're not familiar with her, she is the same star sign as LQC, although her self-imprint is attack, not defense, and she doesn't have other innate forms of damage mitigation. So you could probably run her on a Draco plate if you want survivability, but again, warriors, potentially if you're going to go for the counter type build, the bruiser counter play, you probably want Sigurd's Scythe there. I think that would be the best case scenario. Sigurd's Scythe would basically be compensating for her attack loss when her HP is 50% or less, which is Sigurd's Scythe triggering mechanic. It has to be 50% or less for it to trigger, so you get a bit of that attack back that you lose from when she has 50% health or more. Ragnar's Spear is so let's go for the Awakened version. So it requires 5 souls now instead of 3. Soulburn increases the damage dealt. Before it was again, like I said, 2.2 times mod, I believe, and then but without it, it's a 1.5. So now it's a 50% defense pen, 1.5 times mod, which will make her actually about the same amount of damage with the Soulburn here. So really, realistically, this looks to be about actually less than Surmia's. Actually, let's put it this way. So Surmia's Soulburn S3. The only thing with Surmia is that she grants a greater attack buff to herself, so the amount of comparison I'm making here is not exactly 100% accurate. So Surmia can greater attack buff herself. Luna, let's say she gets an attack buff, regular attack buff, and Surmia gets a regular attack buff. This skill is looking to be about the middle ground of Surmia's S3. Surmia's S3 is 1.2 times mod with a 50% defense pen without Soulburn, and then 1.65 times mod, so 15% more damage than Luna's. But Luna doesn't need to Soulburn it for 1.5, right? So it's still gonna do a lot of damage, but Surmia self buffs. So Luna doesn't have that. So if you have an outside attack buffer, which most likely you will want, we'll see how this looks, but it will do quite a bit of damage. It will do quite a bit of damage, but I think it's just gonna be a tad more damage, more than you doing a 2.2 times mod, which is 70%, right? 70% more damage than you would have done on the regular S3, pending the same scenario. Now, defense pen is pretty big, so I'm not looking down on that at all. I think that, again, based on just my experience of the game, I didn't run like some crazy formula to find this out, but she'll probably do a bit more damage than her Soulburn version, but it won't be like a super insane difference, in my opinion. So it requires 5 souls now instead of 3. So again, all in all, I think that the Luna buff here looks to be a really good buff. Now, if she isn't usable, in, let's say, a world arena scenario, which will be the main testing grounds for most people, in my opinion, it's not gonna be that bad. But she, like, in terms of, like, I wasn't gonna expect her to be like a world arena meta hero. If anything, at least now it makes her PvE usability even better, right? So, but if you are gonna look into a bruiser Luna build, at least you have Sigurd Scythe, and you have the increased critical hit chance. Critical hit resistance as well in her kit. So overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the buff. In my opinion, like, they addressed the notes that we wanted addressed. So I have no argument there. But again, whether or not she'll be usable, widely usable, I'll remain on the skeptical side. Kawerik, on the other hand, is probably the hero that I've been most excited about here, to be honest. Dimensional Corridor, 100% chance to dispel 2 debuffs before increasing the skill cooldown by 1 turn twice. So if you're soul burning, and he can hold his own book. If you're soul burning, it's guaranteed. Ignores effect resistance. So you have a 2 buff strip, and you have a 2 turn cooldown. That's gonna be insanely good. Now, not only that, they did address what we wanted, which was before the stealth was on the wrong skill. You would want to open with the S2 anyway. With his EE giving him an attack buff, the way it was before was attack buff when using Dimensional Corridor. Now the attack buff will be applied before using Dimensional Explosion. Before it was like he wouldn't get the attack buff. He would have the attack buff set up for the S3, but then he wouldn't be able to, you know, how do you say it? Like it feels like he wouldn't be able to get the turn. Like, because he's not in stealth on the turn, he's in stealth on the S3, so it put him in a kind of like a scary place. Like, he's very vulnerable, and if you're making him as a speedy mage, then he's not got no bulk, and he doesn't need effectiveness. So most likely you're gonna still be making him a speedy DPS. He'll be a pretty decent opener DPS, I think, for very aggro comps trying to reset heroes that really need that S3. Now, that's always been the case for him in terms of that was I think his selling point, but, you know, it's just because his survival is just so bad. Like if he resetted someone, then it wouldn't really matter too much, I guess. But now with the stealth on the S2 on Dimensional Corridor, I think this is going to be a lot better. That's my opinion. That's always what I felt that was the weird place. So in terms of, like, is he going to be in a bruiser lineup? Probably not. Like I said, I think he should be built as a speedy opener. The S2 does actually do quite a bit of damage. It does do a 1.4 times mod. So that's a pretty strong nuking damage. Again, we were just comparing Luna before doing a 1.5 without a soul burn, before the defense pen. This is a 1.4. You're missing about 10% damage, and he has very high base attack. So, you know, Kawerik is pretty strong. Like, his strongest skill before was the S2 anyway, but now, so it's granting the stealth and increased speed for 2 turns, and he's a speed scaling DPS as well. His speed scaling, if I remember correctly, it's not super high, but it's definitely notable, so you would want to build him as a speedy DPS anyway. Dispel 2B, yeah, so that's pretty much it. And then Dimensional Explosion attacks all enemies with an explosion, silencing for 1 turn, and penetrate defense by 30%. Damage will increase proportion to caster speed. So looking at his mods, he was like a 0.8 times mod. So he's lacking about 20% damage on a regular, let's say a 1 times mod S3, with a 30% defense pen to compensate for it. So realistically, he's doing about a 1 times mod. That's basically it. But the exclusive equipment now has changed. So before, it was increasing the attack for 2 turns with using Dimensional Corridor. So that means that he doesn't get the attack buff before the S2. So the S2 is going to be without an attack buff unless you have an attack buff running before him. But then he uses to set up for the S3. But like I said before, his problem was that his stealth was on the S3, so then he would be left vulnerable before he can get the S3 popped off. Now the option 1 is changed to increase the attack of the caster for 2 turns before attacking using Dimensional Explosion. So when you're using the S3 now, he'll grant the attack buff beforehand. So that's like a la Pavel S2, you know, Rems S3. Using those as examples right now because they're more prevalent. So he'll get the attack buff benefit from it. So it will definitely help his damage on the S3. But again, in terms of the way it was before, it technically looked the same, except now he has the stealth granted on the S2. So giving him a higher probability of being able to do the S3 with an attack buff. It does silence though. That's something that I think we should not forget. It does silence for 1 turn. So you might have to have effectiveness in play, you might not. The S1 already does silence as well, so you know, overall I think again this patch seemingly addresses the stuff that we wanted, so you know, I'm not gonna complain about it. Mort, again, sharing the same thing. They seem to have addressed certain aspects of what we wanted, so increasing RNG levels, etc, etc, and increasing the increasing his effectiveness overall, right? So extermination, we'll look at the awakened version. Pierce the enemy, 50% chance to decrease the defense for 2 turns, ignores effect resistance if the caster is enraged. So similar to Fire Ken, right? Similar to Fire Ken, when he has a vigor buff, he has a ability to ignore the effect resistance on the defense break. But now you're guaranteed now, if you do the S3, he is enraged, and if you have a soul burn, you can have it 100% rate without effect resist, the effect resistance check. So it just ignores it completely. So that's pretty good, right? So in terms of the S1, it's pretty good. Now Mort as a hero overall, like, does that make him good? You know, argument, you know, sake, maybe more usable now, but probably you wouldn't be using it for the injury specifically. Immune to stun and sleep has always been one of his strongest suits in my opinion. It's like, you know, those two are just good to have. So the only things that can really, you know, disable him are like silence, provoke and stuff like that, or disable him into a way that, you know, may be beneficial to you. Now increase the 30% chance to counterattack when attacked. So similar to the Green Purgus skill or the Green Purgus passive, we've seen how that works. So if you have this 30% chance to counterattack when attacked, and you have it on a counter set, you have a 50% chance. Realistically speaking, you have a 50% chance. Yeah, that could be good, but the very fact that he is a hero that is able to use Elber's Ritual Sword, I think personally I would probably look into speed set still, just so that it scales his speed buff. But again, you know, having a counter set, and I've seen Morts before the buff have a counter set as well. I mean, just for the defense break itself. So I mean, it's not bad to have. It's not bad to have at all. Now that he'll have a 50% chance, so even if he has a counter, and you're enraged and you can ignore effect resist, like having a defense break proc on the opponents that hit you is, you know, it's good, right? It's really good. So like, why not have him on a counter? And he has, again, access to Elber's Ritual Sword. I think will still probably be his go-to, seeing how his S1 works. Now, if the caster inflicts a critical hit when using a basic skill, so the S1 has a 50% chance to activate Sacred Blessing, can be only activated once every 2 turns. So Sacred Blessing before was 40% proc rate, now it's at 50% proc rate. So, you know, a lot of people already said that before. It's like, oh, he's an RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG hero. Of course, they lower the RNG requirement by 10%, and then a critical hit resistance has a 50% chance to ignore the critical hit, or a crit, and it's still going to be pretty much the same thing. Now, it's just a bit tuned. I'm okay with Mort being this way. I think that this will make him more usable. In fact, this has probably convinced me that if I had the Mola, I wouldn't mind building him for specific mechanics. Like, some people really love that stun, right? Stun lock you like A Tywin and stuff. So he wouldn't be too terrible there. The speed down would of course not be so beneficial there. So like, there's a lot of mechanics I think that if he plays into, he could be still okay. But the issue is that he is an HP scaling bruiser, and so similar sufferings to like APOC Ravi. But you know what? I think for people who love Mort, this could be the buff that they wanted. And like I said, I said that if I had Namola, I would probably play around with him. He would take a specific requirement, especially if I go for speed set, specific type of gear that I won't be using on a lot of heroes at this moment. Like I could put that kind of sets on like Luna and Apocalypse Ravi, but I'm not 100% sure if, you know, if I'm gonna be running those two in PvP. But Mort has Elber Social Storage, so that means he has a bit of reach, but not for Spectani, right? But anyways, and then the last skill, so the S3 Advent Mortelix, now increasing the injury up to 20% and increases the damage dealt without a soul burn necessary to proc that. So I mean, is that good enough? He self-heals. Like the S3 is pretty packed. If you remove the injury out of the equation, the S3 is pretty packed in and of itself. He will be able to be enraged, which will help his S1. He will recover health based on his damage dealt, increasing the damage now without a soul burn would just be better. I think it was like 4-turn or 5-turn cooldown. I think it was a 5-turn cooldown. I remember it being pretty long because of the injury. So you know, having the speed buff on the Sacred Blessing, you know, it will help him cycle a bit faster, but it's still a long skill to recycle. So 5-turn cooldown if I remember correctly. But again, the injury play is that the skill null, any time you don't proc a number when you do that, like when you're hitting, you'll basically not set injury off. So if they're in invincibility, if they have barrier and you don't break through the barrier, if they have skill null, the injury will not affect, it will not apply. So he'll still have that suffering, but again, it's a bit better just because so we're talking about old Mort to new Mort. Yes, of course he's better. But I think the question most people have when these buffs is like, oh, does that make them, you know, usable now, right? So if you're willing to wait, I would just wait for people to test these heroes and see where it goes. In my opinion, I don't feel that the 5 stars, even with Kawerik's buff, they're not gonna really make a dent in what's the popular choices in World Arena. And again, I think right now you're just gonna basically have more options to use, maybe in like a Guild War offense or something, and a pocket pick scenario in World Arena. Maybe Apocalypse Ravi a bit more than pocket pick, but the rest so far, what I'm seeing is a bit of pocket pick. Roaming Warrior Leo. So I never liked him before just because he was ugly, and I say this all the time. I still don't think this doesn't make him look better in terms of his aesthetics, but it does make his kit look better, so I can't argue. If he's usable, I'll use it. With the Summertime Assyria being released with bombs, I mean, does that make them like okay pairing? Perhaps. I mean, she can dispel or dispel buffs just for those two alone, so if you don't run an external strip, these two alone, like they might be usable now, but we'll have to see if bomb meta will become a thing or even a niche meta. So fire shock bomb after, decrease the defense for 2 turns, so a bit better in terms of, you know, defense break for 2 turns is good. This is a single target skill though, so decrease the cooldown of Go Raku by 1 turn. At the end of the turn, detonates bomb inflicted on the enemy. And then the Go Raku after is now changed slightly. Attacks all enemies with Raku, decreasing the buff duration by 1 turn, but for 100% chance to each to decrease the speed and plant a bomb for 2 turns. Grant skill nullifier to the caster 1. So in terms of I think his rotation, he has a soul burn to do an extra turn. I think that's a soul burn. So in terms of, I think his rotation, I think overall he'll probably be more usable. Again, my issue is like the bomb. He'll need to hit, so he won't be able to plant a bomb if people evade, whereas Summertime Assyria won't need that requirement. I did make that that comment in my initial thoughts on Summer Assyria. So elemental agnostic for Summer Assyria's planting bomb, but if they somehow evade or he's blind, he won't be able to apply the bomb. In terms of like if he misses, he won't apply it. But of course, there's still the resistance check because it is a debuff. So, Dominiel. Some people are saying that hey, she's gonna be much more used. I never used Dominiel myself. I've never been a high like relying on a stun type player, but now with the new ML Angelica or the light Angel of Light Angelica and the Spez banner, they're going to be paired together on the next Mystic rotation. I don't own Spez, so I mean the more stun options I have, the better. If I'm gonna be building Spez, I think I probably will because he's a pretty good single target nuker. Regardless, let's keep going. So I mean, now instead of a 50% chance to decrease the speed for 2 turns, she'll have a 40% chance to stun for 1 turn. So Politis as 1, but soul burning for 10%, or sorry, 10 soul burn will increase it to 60%. It's still not very high, so I mean, unless you're feeling lucky, the feeling of using the soul burn to increase it up to 60% feels a bit salty to me. Whereas like a Politis 20 soul burn gives her an extra turn, so lowers the cooldown for her Astral Guide and her S3. Feels like it's a bit better. Like I would take the 20 souls to be able to get an extra turn in terms of Politis compared to Dominiel getting a 60%. Still 40% chance to not even proc it. So it's like kind of like wasting a 10 souls. In my opinion, unless you're in a clutch fight, you're really not going to use that soul burn. That's my opinion though. And then Nixie's Grace instead of Blizzard Cape. So really they're just applying Nixie's Grace to Blizzard Cape to the passive here. So instead of a skill Blizzard Cape, it is a passive, I believe. This is how it reads. It seems to be a passive now, converted. So cast a barrier over all allies for 2 turns. So sorry, when an ally suffers a critical hit, has a 35% chance to activate Blizzard Cape. Can only be activated once every 3 turns. So I don't necessarily know if this is better. Like unless I miss something like really like dramatically. The soul burn on the S2, all skill cooldowns decreased by 2 turns. Like I don't know. I feel that I don't like the RNG aspect, my opinion. Like if we already complaining about Mort's like RNG at that 40%, and her requirement is even higher, is that it's 35%, but then you have to have a critical hit. So, and it's only an ally. When an ally suffers a critical hit, I'm assuming it means herself too. Maybe not though. Maybe not. But it can only be activated once every 3 turns, and then cast a barrier over all allies for 2 turns with frost magic. Barrier increases proportional. Let's look at the awakened version. It increases proportional to allies' max health. So the barrier will probably be more usable than it was before, because before it was proportional to allies' attack. So realistically, you could set her to be more bulky instead of like wasting it onto the attack. But I think how she was used before, it wasn't not just the stun bot. I think there was still some attack in there. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this. I've never used Ice Dominiel. So for those who are Ice Dominiel fans or have used her, you know, let me know in the comments down below what do you think about this. I'm not quite sure, unless like I said, unless I'm missing something really big. Ice Spear though has a 100% chance to decrease the combat readiness by 15% instead of 50% chance to decrease it by 30%. So it's more usable. Like I would take this more like over this for sure. 90% chance to stun for 1 turn, so it's the same, and then the speed buff for 2 turns. Self speed buff. So I think realistically, like what that's trying to do is remove some of that guaranteedness of the S2 by giving her speed so she could turn cycle a bit quicker. I think that's the thought process there, and I think they say it here, but I didn't read it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm not gonna go out of my way to build Dominiel, I think, at the moment. I don't have Silver Blade Araminta, so in terms of like a AoE stunner, she still might be my best choice if I play with Spez a lot. Mercedes, so Fire Mercedes, this is her second buff if I'm counting correctly. Second buff. You know what? I kind of like it. We had that preview notice like a couple months ago where they kind of previewed it. I don't know if it's a mistake in terms of like a miswritten thing. They were saying that Mercedes getting a specialty change. You know, maybe we'll see that in the next episode, in episode 4, maybe after the anniversary. So, you know, whatever buffs that she's getting right now, I'm keeping my eyes like peeled. I'm really trying to assess like, you know, what she's gonna look like if she gets a specialty change, and how that applies. So I'm really kind of trying to imagine how she's working with these skills. So in case you're looking at a Mercedes and you're just like, whatever, she's like free and she won't be used. Hey man, look, A-Roz had his reign, right? And he's still usable in like certain offensive comps, very, very solid. You know, I'm excited. If she gets a specialty change, excited that would happen, right? So Divine Bolt after, so attacks 2 enemies with a shock of magic, increase combat readiness by 15%. So again, more combat readiness. So it seems to be the play. I mean, EEs giving you combat readiness, or buffs with combat readiness, or heroes released with combat readiness, and everybody's going bananas. It's like, this is OP, right? Combat readiness, so good. Attacks all enemies with a light sphere with a 70% chance to dispel 1 buff. So they changed the skill enhancement, so this is something that I shouldn't overlook. Plus 15, so 85% chance to dispel 1 buff. So this is AoE skill. So AoE, 85% chance to dispel. That's better than Violin. So, you know, I love Violin, so it's pretty nifty. If used when there are 3 or fewer enemies, damage dealt is increased as the enemies become fewer, and then when the caster is granted an increased attack, activates the Dimensional Rapture again as an extra attack. So that would pretty much look more like kind of like Vivian's S2. Or was it S2? Yeah, S2. So her trigger extra attack as the heroes are dying off, and she can do it 3 times. She only do this 1 more time, and when activated this way, it would do decreased damage. So similar to how Vivian works, but her requirement is only if she has an attack buff. So that's pretty cool. Again, comparing before, it was just, you know, activates it again if there are less enemies. But now it's with I can't even talk. With increased attack, okay. Acquire soul is only 1, but it does dispel. So in terms of, I think, usability, it gives her a broader range of rolls. So I think it's okay. And then Blazing Eye of Call is we'll look at the Awakened version. Increasing damage dealt. There's slight changes here. It looks like it to be a bit lower damage, right? Am I calculating that right? So that's 30-50% more damage. Whoa, she had a 50% damage? That's actually crazy. Her mods must be really low. Because I mean, every hero release right now, we're getting only 30% raw damage. I guess it's just easier for them to change the damage formula or modifiers. So we have 10, 15, 30, so 35. So it's reduced to 35. Let's see here. So release the power of Ancient Book, attacks all enemies before increased attack of all allies. So she gets her own attack buff, and she becomes a attack buffer for everyone instead of just for the caster. So very, very good. And the critical hit will increase the damage dealt. So that I see. That's why they had to lower the damage. So it will most likely be about the same amount of damage without looking at their remodified damage or the additional damage. It'll probably be about the same, but proportion to target's lost health. That mechanic definitely is seeing less play. Damage proportion to the target's lost health. Again, with World Arena, lost health means that let's say if Crow is at 10,000 HP and somehow there's no healer and you don't keep hitting the Crow, as Frenzy goes down, the lost health, I think it remains proportional. So I think that doesn't change, but there's definitely some loss in terms of how much bulkier heroes are now. I think that was one of the major changes for that Chaos Sect Axe rework, that he used to do damage proportional to the target's lost health, and then they changed that completely, because I said that before when I was commenting on his rework, that because of I-90 gear, it changes how these sort of proportional skills really work, especially when it's banking on the bulkiness of the opponent. So 2 artifacts, Merciless Glutton and Secret Art Sword, Storm Sword. How do I feel about these? Merciless Glutton, first things first, is that if you know me quite well, and I know a lot of my more loyal viewers, they know this history, I have a very, very powerful skill. And this skill is that if I'm summoning on a Mystic rotation, I, more often than not, like max limit break the artifact on the banner that I'm, on the banner rotation I'm pulling on. Merciless Glutton was one of them. I forgot what hero I was going for there, but it must have been a hero that I needed to pity. I max limit broke it 1.5 times. So in terms of I never had the artifact. It was so stupid too. It was so stupid. I think it was back in the day when they started introducing these artifacts for the old RGB heroes, and when Yufine was on, I think I was pulling her, and I wanted to pull for Merciless Glutton. It was when I was they introduced the artifacts pretty fresh, so it was kind of oh, there's a new artifact, I must chase it, and I pulled 2 green Yufines. I already had Yufine. Pulled 2 for Merciless Glutton, I couldn't get it, right? So that was a waste of bookmarks. And then realizing that, okay, it's a really bad artifact, I got 1.5 max limit broken Merciless Glutton. I forgot which Mystic rotation it was as well. That I also max limit broke another Elber's Ritual Sword. So without having to pull on Elber's Ritual Swords on a return banner or buy from a powder shop, I have 2 max limit broken Elber's Ritual Swords with 3 more copies. So I have 3 Elber's Ritual Swords. The other one is 3 out of 6 max limit broken. And I'm, as I'm posting this video, I'm gonna be posting my summons for ML Charles. You'll see I max limit break Wind Rider in 1 run. So I know you would be people who don't appreciate me or who don't like me, they'll be okay, cool story, bro, or nice flex, Jagan, whatever. But people who really know me, you will find this really funny. Especially, this is why I don't usually like pulling Mystic rotations on a bad artifact banner. Anyways, long story short, that's just a lore thing. I'll timestamp it so that you totally miss that story. But if you're here for the long run and you have heard it, then you probably gained a little nugget of knowledge. But Merciless Glutton, when using a single attack, so it only locked to a single attack. I misread this before. I thought that this would be Strays' other artifact. I think that Crimson, is it called Crimson Azure? Yeah, no, is it Azure Comet? Sorry, Crimson Azure. I don't know what. Yeah, Azure Comet was his go-to, and I thought that this would be his other go-to. So 1 CR boost himself, the other 1 CR boost his teammates, but it is a single target attack only, so that lowers the usefulness of it. Maybe Apocalypse Ravi, maybe Luna, because I mean Apocalypse Ravi and Luna both have critical hit innate, so you don't need to run you can use this as basically Exorcist Tonfa or Symbol of Unity. But if they're defeated, you'll get a combat readiness boost of for your allies by up to 12%. So in terms of artifact to artifact, it is a much better artifact than it was before. Before, it increased the combat readiness of the caster by 15% when the enemy is defeated, and that's already pretty hard to achieve. And then up to, if you max limit break, 100% chance to increase the effectiveness for 2 turns, which is pretty much a useless skill, and it can only be activated once per skill. So it ends up being I mean, it was a not used artifact. I don't think anybody used it. It couldn't be used for PvP, or sorry, PvE, because again, unless you're farming, if you're doing a boss hit, if you defeated it, why are you increasing your combat readiness, right? It's all that kind of stuff. And then so, now with this, maybe usable in PvE scenario still, but ignoring the combat readiness, but just going with the kind of Exorcist Tonfa, Portrait of Savior kind of thing. The only benefit from this is, of course, that it does not take a HP threshold to be able to proc that extra 16% damage. So I guess more along the lines of Symbol of Unity, which makes it a pretty decent skill. But like I said, or decent artifact. But like I said, it is a single target attack only, so you can't run this on like a Judge Kisei or something like that. Otherwise, this will probably have some more play. At this point, I'm not really sold on it in terms of like it will be more like necessary to use in terms of the other warrior artifacts currently that I think are stronger. So Draco Plate, I would take that 30% crit damage over 16% attack. Not saying that it does more damage, but you have that 16% critical hit reduction in Draco Plate, a Sigurd Scythe with the self-sustain, Azure Comet for that CR boost. I've noticed that a lot of people are trying to play with that. I don't know why I call it like Azure Crimson Azure or whatever, Azure Comet. They're using it now for like some single target like setup or something for a cleave deck or something. So I feel that Merciless Glutton is still not in the place that it really wants to be at, but I don't blame it, just because, like, you know, unless it's meta and game breaking, a lot of people most likely don't have this artifact sitting around, not like me. So most people probably sold it for powder when they had the chance, or maybe they did keep a copy, but they don't have a max limit broken version maybe. So it's kind of good. I think it's okay. It's a step up. So I'll probably be using it somewhere. I just don't think that it's a PvP, very high PvP chance of using. Secret Art Swordstorm. The increase of this is interesting. Increasing combat readiness by up to 24%. That to me is pretty good. I'm assuming that it's not requiring max limit broken to get 24%, since the increased chance is the chance to attack buff. But since it reads and has a 100% chance to increase attack for one turn, I don't know, maybe we'll have to see. My Storm Sword is max limit broken. I actually did chase it back when I thought that, you know, I would use Selene a lot more. Actually, you know what? In fact, I have been using Selene a lot more just because of the Alina buff. More Alinas on defense. I've been using a Selene just to, you know, one shot the damage dealer that they have paired with Alina defense on arena defense. So in terms of the usefulness of the sword, the artifact, I definitely start seeing more use. But now with the combat readiness, I feel like now it's much more applicable to other thieves, not just Selene. I was thinking about this artifact on ML Charles. Again, if you proc the, like, let's say Alina, right? Again, like, I'm just thinking about like a offensive cleave deck. Like, you know, you could proc the Alina S2, and then you force him to get an attack buff, and then he boosts his CR by 24%. Now, if Alina is on a tome, most likely she's going to beat your Charles, unless your MO Charles is really quick. But it just started giving me those kind of ideas again, you know, like, I mean, you could limit her CR push with Politis, get him with an attack buff. His S3 is pretty strong, near RB level S3 without a soul burn and full focus. So once you have an attack buff, you cleave with the AoE, you have an extra attack buff for the rest of the team. You can set up for C-DOMs and stuff like that. So I do feel like now that this artifact has a bit more play. I can definitely see it being used more, but realistically in a comp where, unless it's on a Selene, realistically it's a comp that's controllable. So in offensive fights like Guild War or what's it called, or Arena. But whether or not that this will be used outside of Selene, we'll have to see. But 24% combat readiness, again, going to CR boost again, you know, add a CR boost and the thing is much more usable. CR boost again, but the way it works, I definitely think that it has some viability for certain opening type heroes. Heck, even you're putting on a blue Kisei. I'm just thinking about all these like thieves right now that could benefit from the extra 24% push. depending on what they're running into. So regardless, I think the Sword Storm is a better buff than Merciless Glutton, but again, whether or not it will be used like widely, we'll have to see. Because it does require the enemy to proc it. So you have no control over that unless it's one of those automatic skills that occur. So the new Angel of Light Angelica, like you could proc that, so that could be cool. And then Alina and stuff like that. ML Kawazu actually would work too. Interesting. I just thinking off the top of my head. Anyways, so that's my thoughts for the patch notes. I mean, this has been an hour. A lot of stuff that I talked about. I will definitely include the timestamps. But I'll just end this for the video recording. Hope you guys did enjoy it. If you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.